Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm Ukrainian Canadian. Today is December 2nd, 2024, and let's get to the news and updates happening in Ukraine and Russia, shall we? So I'll go over some good updates with military assistance packages being given to Ukraine in the last few days. I'll give you my 5 cents again on Syria and Georgia. So it's going to be a very brief video. I'm going to try to go over the main headlines, and we're going to do a map update a little bit later this week. So let's get to it. Today was a big day for Zelensky because Chancellor Scholz of Germany visited Kiev. And last time he did that was back in spring of 2022. So it's a big moment. And of course, he arrived with another great announcement, great news of providing a military assistance package of 650 million euros. So you can see this is a screenshot in German of the assistance package. So Ukraine is going to receive 4 IRIS-T units. So the launchers, they're also going to receive 10 Gepards. Excellent at shutting down the Shahed drones. Additionally, Ukraine is going to receive a few various drones, artillery systems. You can see 12 Panzerhaubitze 2000s, 4 Zuzana systems, ammunition, of course, 30 Leopard 1A5 tanks, 400 MRAP vehicles, and a bunch of logistics vehicles, etc. So this is an excellent package. You can see that Ukraine definitely needs all of those, especially air defense systems. We know that during the winter, Russia is going to maximize its terrorist attacks over Ukrainian cities, trying to destroy not only the energy grid, but also just civilian housing and try to demoralize the Ukrainians even more. They're stockpiling missiles, they're building more. And so the IRIS-T systems are going to be crucial at defending the Ukrainian sky. And they will also strengthen the Ukrainian military. So this is an excellent package. However, unfortunately, as expected, the question of Taurus missiles came up, and Scholz mentioned that they're not going to be coming to Ukraine anytime soon. Perhaps next year, when there's going to be a new German chancellor, because there's going to be an election, they're going to be a little bit more decisive. However, quantity does matter here, and we know that Germany doesn't have that many Taurus missiles. They have a few hundred at best. So we also need to be mindful that even if Ukraine was to receive them, they would be limited in quantities. So again, Ukraine needs to be counting on its own capabilities, its own production, and hopefully they can ramp it up next year to be able to also retaliate on Russian territory with its own weapons. So Ukraine gets to decide when and how it will strike. However, I still want to mention and highlight how thankful I am, and the Ukrainian people as well are, to Germany and their leadership. It's been extremely important. And even though nothing is perfect in this assistance, and there's been a lot of hesitance from Germany in the past in providing weaponry, especially the much needed long range missiles, it's been extremely important, and Germany has really played a crucial role in supporting Ukraine. So we need to highlight that as well. Additionally, we need to talk about Biden, and we know that Biden now is kind of the lame duck president. Nobody really cares much about what Biden is doing now, because we know that next few weeks he's going to be gone. But you can see that Biden is really trying to rush all the military assistance that was pledged for this year. And unfortunately, it seems like the Biden administration also is saying that they might not be able to provide this entire $7 billion military package to Ukraine on time. So we'll have to see. But you can see that it only took 2.5 years, almost 3 years for Biden to realize that, oh, maybe I should have helped Ukraine a little bit more. So thankfully, though, next few days, Ukraine will receive a package of 725 million USD dollars in counter drone technology, anti-personnel mines. So Biden has also approved the usage of anti-personnel landmines, which are going to be helping the Ukrainians at stopping these meat wave assaults from the North Koreans and Russians on occupied Ukraine territory and in Kursk in Russia, and also more munitions for HIMARS systems. Perhaps Ukraine will receive more ATACMS missiles, which are going to be great at targeting Russian targets on Russian territory. And there's another thing I haven't discussed, but it's been kind of looming around the last few weeks, is Biden has been also pressuring Zelensky a lot in the last few weeks of mobilizing and opening up the mobilization of the 18 to 25-year-olds in Ukraine. And there's been a lot that's been said about it. I get the point. If Ukraine is saying that we need more people, then it does make sense to a certain degree to mobilize these young adults. But what he doesn't understand either is that you can say all that you want, that, oh, we've provided everything to Ukraine, all the weapons and assistance. Now it's up to the Ukrainians to do what they have to do to be able to, to be successful in the battlefield. But we know that's not true. First of all, we know that, Ukraine up to this day only received 30 Abrams tanks from the United States, when we know that there's hundreds, if not thousands of them just sitting, picking up dust in the US. We also know that Ukraine has barely received over 250 Bradleys. Half of them have been damaged or destroyed. And again, we know that the US has thousands of these Bradleys, Paladin artillery systems, F-16s, right? The Biden administration is lying when it says that we've given Ukraine enough. What's the point of mobilizing these young adults, these young men, when we know that we don't have the equipment? Ukraine doesn't have the equipment to properly build these brigades with the right vehicles, the right gear. It doesn't make any sense. It's not going to be any different than what Russia's doing right now, just throwing meat on the front line and hoping for results. Additionally, another thing I want to mention about this is that the Biden administration doesn't understand really the cultural factor behind this. It's a very sensitive question for the Ukrainians. That's where you're seeing a lot of Ukrainian men fighting in the military. They're in their 40s, 50s, 60s, definitely more senior, because there's this belief that I'm fighting for the younger generation. I want to leave them behind a better future. What's the point of, mobilizing everybody if let's say you're victorious, there's nobody left to rebuild your country? And so there's also this understanding that Ukraine needs this young demographic to be able to lift up Ukraine once there's going to be peace. Economically, socially speaking, militarily speaking, they're going to need this new, younger generation to uplift Ukraine. And so it's not an easy decision to be made here. And the Ukrainian people absolutely value human life here. And even if they're 18-year-olds and technically they're adults, to the Ukrainian people, they're still seen as kids. They're still seen as young kids that have a future ahead. We don't want to throw them in a meat grinder right away, right? We want to give them an opportunity to grow, to at least have some opportunities to develop before throwing them in a war. And gambling this next generation will have massive consequences. So that's why Ukraine needs to receive more long-range capabilities, more missiles, more of those much-needed vehicles, armored vehicles that are highly coveted by the Ukraine military, whether it be Bradleys or Abrams tanks. It doesn't matter what generation they're from, right? It could be even the older generation tanks from the late 80s, early 90s. But Ukraine has shown how extremely important these vehicles are at protecting Ukrainian lives. And that's one thing that Ukrainians really count on, is preserving life as much as possible, whereas Russia does not. And I think these are important factors that we need to consider when we're saying, why isn't Ukraine just mobilizing the 18 to 25-year-olds, opening that age group? Well, because, Ukraine also is facing a huge demographic situation, shortage, and they don't want to jeopardize it. I don't think it's as critical as we believe it to be. It's just that Ukraine needs more weapons, more vehicles, just more help from the West, and Ukraine isn't fighting a small military. It's literally fighting the second biggest, largest military in the world, Russia. And they still have hundreds of thousands of men that they can spare for this war, as we've seen in the past. For them, 700,000 plus isn't even making a huge difference in the Russian society. I'm very well aware that they're probably going to be ready for another million if they can, right? It's just that we know that the Russian economy isn't doing so well. Of course, you need to have vehicles, you need to have weapons, you need to have ammunition, and Russia's really starting to scrap the bottom of the barrel in 2025. I really believe that it's going to be the last hot phase of this war before, negotiations probably will begin between Russia and Ukraine at the end of next year. Now, you guys can let me know in the comment section what you think. Let me know in the comment section what you think about this, request by the Biden administration to mobilize younger Ukrainians. Do you guys agree with my statement? Do you think that I'm wrong somewhere? I'm eager to hear your opinion. And last but not least, I want to talk about two things. So the dwindling influence of Russia. Of course, I've talked about briefly about Syria and the situation in Syria with the Assad regime losing vast amounts of territory. It has not collapsed, but the rebels have made significant gains and captured the second largest city of Syria, Aleppo, without very minimal gunfighting, which really tells you a lot about the morale within the Assad regime. But this is also a projection of the dwindling Russian influence across the world. And this is really important, although we know that what's going on in Syria isn't going to really impact what's going on in Ukraine, because we know that if Putin has to choose between Syria or Ukraine, he's definitely going to choose Ukraine, and he's not going to abandon that project. He'll abandon all his other allies, Syria, Iran, doesn't matter who, North Korea, but he'll never abandon the project in Ukraine. But it's still hurting the Kremlin. It's still hurting this projection of power, this Russia strong everywhere image. And that's really important. And it's vanishing very quickly. And you can see that Russian voinkors, these Telegram channels and other influential Russian, pro-Russian channels and reporters are saying that what a blunder this was, that they've invested billions of dollars in Syria only to see all these resources wasted away and vanishing because the rebels were able to just capture pretty much and doubling and tripling even the territory under their control in a matter of days. So it's a huge blunder for Russia. And we actually, speaking of Syria as well, what was interesting is that you can see that the rebels, HTS, backed by Turkey, have been using a lot of drones. So they've taken a lot of notes from the Russian-Ukrainian war and they started adopting it themselves, whereas the Syrian Arab army, the Assad regime army, has not. And I think that we can expect even more collapses in the future as the rebels are determined to destroy the Assad regime. But that also brings me to Georgia. With the vanishing Russian influence, we also can see that in Georgia, there's more and more protests in the last few days. This one is far more important. There have been protests in the last few years in Georgia, but this one has been ongoing for many, many days now. And that's because the pro-Russian government in Georgia has essentially said that we're not considering, accession to the EU until 2028. And this gives me flashbacks to what happened in Ukraine 11 years ago during Maidan, where Yanukovych, the then president of Ukraine, said that we're not joining the EU. We're going to take a pro-Russian, we're going to take the route of Russia. And that angered the Ukrainians, and that's what led to Maidan and led to the current war between Ukraine and Russia. And I feel like Georgia is at the same crossroad right now. It's a very historic moment, and we'll see whether Georgia becomes like Ukraine. And unfortunately, you guys understand that if Georgia takes that route, the Ukrainian route, tries to get away from the Russian influence completely, it's probably going to be bloody, unfortunately. I hope it's not bloody, and I hope that it's going to be as quick and as painless as possible for the Georgian people. But we know that the Russian tentacles grew so strong in Georgia in the past decade and a half that it's going to be very hard to get away from it without some bloody conflict. And that's the crossroads, whether Georgia takes that path or it takes the path of Belarus and becomes kind of a numb satellite of Russia, where the people, albeit are not happy with Lukashenko, they can't do anything, right? And there was a chance in 2020 to really get away from that pro-Russian influence. We saw millions of people in the streets of Minsk protesting against the Lukashenko regime, but it vanished in a matter of a few weeks. All that stopped because there was not an effective organization of the opposition. And we'll have to see what happens in Georgia. I'm really hoping that they're going to take the right path, but it's going to be a very difficult one as well. Let's not kid ourselves that it's going to be an easy path, and by selecting and choosing a European pathway, that somehow Georgia is going to come out of it without any suffering, and it's going to be as bloodless as we've seen the past in other protests. Like, it's not going to happen like that, in my opinion. So it's going to be a very difficult pathway for the Georgian people. And we have to support them as best as we can. Unfortunately, with the context of all these different wars, I think that the West is definitely not as interested right now to support Georgia as it would have been maybe in the past. But we really need to give our support for the Georgian people and hoping that they take the right decision. It's up to them. At the end of the day, they decide to have a bad peace rather than having a good war. It's their decision. But we know that whenever there is Russia present in any country, nothing good comes out of it, unfortunately. It's stagnation, it's oppression, repression, deaths, torture, etc. It's not a good opportunity. It's not a good life that you're going to have under Russian influence. So thank you for your support, guys. I hope you enjoyed my update today. and let me know what you think about any of the topics I covered. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Again, if you want to donate some of your money to the Ukrainian military, I have a link in the description below where you can donate some of your money to the Ukrainian FPV drone program. And that's going to be a huge boost for the Ukrainian military. So a huge thank you for support. And I will see you guys in the next one. Slava Ukraini!